Sudan. At the border into Sudan, the gate was locked and no one could find the key. Two men in army uniform spent a long time arguing before a third man in a suit drove up in a Mercedes and handed them a wad of keys. There was much amusement from the group. Still far more efficient than passport control at Heathrow, I said to Nate. Much simpler than the US, said Nate. We were then given a military escort into the border town of Wadi Haifa, announcing our presence far more conspicuously than had we simply cycled alone. The town felt instantly hospitable, with locals in white robes smiling and offering us cups of fresh tea. We embarked into the main square for dinner and found muscular men smiling and beckoning us into ramshackle restaurants, with lines of chickens outside roasting on spits. Inside, our plates were filled with spiced meat, more than even a hungry cyclist could consume. The restaurateurs were concerned that their dishes would not suit our Western appetites, and made every effort to check we were okay, or offer us alternatives, unaware that these protein-heavy feasts were exactly what our aching cycling muscles required. We tried to tip with our newly acquired Sudanese pounds, but were immediately given the money back as change. The meal had probably cost us the equivalent of $1 each. Sudan was the first country where the mosquitoes had a risk of carrying malaria, and in my tent that evening I reluctantly tucked into the first of my pills. The tour organisers had recommended bringing an array of health products: painkillers, Imodium, rehydration pills, more diarrhea medication, and I had so far kept these stashed in the bottom of my bag, confident I'd never have to use them. However, malaria was unavoidable. I downed my required dose and then rested down for the night. Despite the horror stories about hallucinations, my sleep was disturbed only by the snoring of the other riders and the occasional braying of a donkey. Maybe the drugs did work after all. We left Wadi Haifa and were soon back in the desert. The area north of Khartoum was Sudanese gold mining country, and the land was a series of rocky escarpments, fenced off and labelled with threatening signs. Sudan was a country rich in mineral resources, but there was much dispute about the ownership of land, and amateur mining was a risky business. On the road, we were passed by jeeps packed with prospectors, many holding guns. Nate and I observed our usual policy of smiling and waving, and most of the men responded with smiles back. Some even allowed us to ride behind them, protecting us from the desert wind, and they laughed as we pedalled desperately to keep up. Clearly our pink light was not deemed much of a threat. A few more days along the desert road led us to Dongola, a bustling market town on the west bank of the River Nile. It was full of powerful-looking men with muscular torsos, and scores more cafes with spit roast chickens out front. We parked our bikes and went to take in some of the local cuisine, which turned out to be more plates of spiced chicken and very little else. It explained the protein-fueled physiques. Nate made conversation with some of the locals in Arabic and told me that their general comments were they will not try and sell us anything because they are not Egyptian. Like Nate, I didn't have too many problems with precious selling in Egypt, but there was no doubt that Sudan was refreshingly relaxed. Having had our fill of poultry, we took a slow ride back to our campsite. A couple of teenagers ran alongside us. "Hey," they said. "Hey you, nice bikes." We smiled and slowed down. The shortest of the three approached us with a sheepish look. "My friend is very poor, and he says he would love to have a bicycle like yours." We made apologetic faces and told him we didn't have any money. Then I noticed his friends smiling and waving from the side of the road. "Only kidding," the kids said. "We don't want your crappy bikes. Just a photo of you on our phones." We spent the night camping at an abandoned amusement park by the River Nile. The large quantity of meat gave me lurid dreams about being stuck on a carousel. I woke up and took some paracetamol. The reliance on drugs was only just beginning. During the day, temperatures were approaching 40 degrees C, and to cope, we went for swims in the River Nile. It was supposed to be full of leeches and bilharzia, but the cooling water more than counterbalanced the risk. People have been doing this for thousands of years, so I didn't understand what the problem would be. Suitably cooled, Nate and I dried off together on the bank. "They say once you drink from the Nile, you're destined to return," he said. "What happens if you swim in it?" I asked. "I think then you will never properly leave." "I don't think I'd mind that too much." "Me neither," said Nate. Slowly our Western white-collar lives were being washed away, flowing back towards the Mediterranean and into the sea. The road turned away from the river and headed straight into the boiling cauldron of the bone-dried desert. On the bikes, we were able to work up a breeze, but even this parched our skin in minutes. Occasionally we came across a village with welcoming shade and a tiny shop selling coke, but these were few and far between. In one such establishment, Nate and I sat, swigging, on endless bottles of water. A group of locals sat on the other side of the room, looking over to us. One of them gestured to us for a chat. They spoke in Arabic, which Nate was able to understand. I gained from the expression on his face that the conversation was not as genial as we were used to. "What are they saying?" I asked him. "They are asking if we are Muslim," he said, "and that Sudan is a Muslim country." I smiled at the men and bowed respectfully, thinking about our fellow riders bearing swathes of skin in their t-shirts and lycra shorts. "Sudan is a beautiful country," said Nate to them in Arabic. The men nodded suspiciously. We quickly finished our drinks and left the cafe. It was a difficult issue. Sudan is a country that abides by Sharia law, with strict rules. Women who did not dress modestly could be publicly whipped. Non-believers that refused to convert could be imprisoned and even given the death penalty. Homosexuals could suffer even worse, something which I was too sheepish to even discuss with Nate. However, at the same time, we were visitors to the country and were acting in complete ignorance of local custom. We could expect suspicion at least. At the campsite that evening, there was a skeleton of a dead camel. Temperatures at night were touching 40 degrees. In order to help morale, I composed a song to the tune of Spice Girls' Wannabe, the Coke Stop song. If you want to get to Khartoum, you've got to stop for a Coke. Making times for sociopaths, Coke is for your friends. If you want to get to Khartoum, Coke's the only way. Beer's against the law, and so is being gay. So what do you think about that? It's like the 1920s. Damn you, Sharia law. I'm thirsty. I'm thirsty. So don't go wasting. No precious time. Get off at the Coke stop, and we'll have a gay old time. Nate provided a more sophisticated alternative, using his astronomy background to point out the constellations and galaxies that lit up the night sky. The desert may have felt oppressively hot during the day, but in darkness it was a place of peace and meditation. A simple visage of sand, sky and stars that calmed the senses and humbled our thoughts into wonder. I felt more at peace here than anywhere else on earth. The temperatures continued to rise, and the cycling became increasingly arduous. The road was an energy-sapping morass of sand and gravel. We camped as close to the Nile as possible, accepting the invasion of flies and mosquitoes as suitable pain for the luxury of a cool bath. After the final day of cycling through the Sahara, I passed out during dinner. Hot soup and hot water were simply not enough for my body to rehydrate. I spent the night throwing up, which Sharita kindly dealt with by moving my tent 50 centimetres away from the vomit. Fortunately, we then had a 2-day break in Khartoum, where we were camping in the grounds of a 4-star hotel. I booked a room and lay in the bathroom being sick, while some of the other American cyclists berated the staff for the high price of chips and the charges for towels to use for the swimming pool. First world problems all round. The next day I began to feel normal again and joined Nate on a visit to the tomb of Hamid al-Nil, a Sufi leader from the 19th century. Every Friday, Sufis gathered at the tomb to pray and dance, attaining a connection with God by engaging in frenzied chanting and twirling, and the spectacle always drew a large crowd. As the Sufis whirled around manically, I was reminded of my friend Nick from Boston, who used marathon running as a means to communicate with his dead brother. Different world, similar principles. Religious fervour travels a long way. Khartoum was a difficult city to comprehend. By the Nile there were wide tree-lined promenades, grand hotels, and the presidential palace. Further into the interior, there was an endless grid of small streets with garages and shops, mostly quiet but for ubiquitous groups of men hanging around with nothing to do. In the centre of town was the vast Souk Arabi, an open market that covered around 5 city squares, full of people, products, animals, clothes, and general madness. We drove past the new presidential palace that was constructed by a Chinese firm and opened only 3 days previously. The opening was timed to celebrate the 130th anniversary of the Mahdi's overthrow of British rule in Sudan, when the British commander, Lord Gordon, lost his head on the steps of the old presidential palace. Another wonderful legacy of British rule, I said to Nate. At the confluence of the Blue and White Niles, we walked over the bridge to take pictures, but were ordered to put our cameras away until we would be arrested if we disobeyed. On the way back to the hotel, we were drawn into a brand new American-style shopping mall, the promise of 3-scoop ice creams proving impossible to resist. It's hard to know if colonialism has ended or is beginning again, said Nate, as an unlikely number of white faces walked past us. It's either colonialism or globalism, I said. Or Americanism in an Islamic state funded by China. A collision of cultures and politics in the hottest city in the world. It was difficult to take it all in. We left Khartoum and headed off-road into Dinda National Park. This was an area that was abandoned by humans after a famine in the late 19th century and was now a fertile ground for sorghum crops, cheetahs, leopards and ostriches. The temperatures rocketed to 50 degrees C and the road was rough and corrugated. Nate and I cycled together, talking and singing our way through the challenging terrain. I sung Fields of Gold by Sting. He sung Desperado by the Eagles. Both felt equally appropriate. We came across roadside stands selling water, coke and tea. Visions of heaven to parched cyclists. We bought 10 bottles each, downing 4 or 5 in one go, and filling our travel bags with the rest. The vendors looked at us like we were crazy. "Why don't you cycle at night?" one said to Nate. In this level of heat, the suggestion did not seem unreasonable. The next few days were the most physically challenging of my life. The mornings were spent forcing the bike through sand and corrugated gravel. The afternoons cycling and trying not to pass out. The nights sleeping in 30-degree heat, a hot breeze blowing through our tents. And yet the rewards were exceptional. The villages we cycled through were untouched by outsiders. Women in colourful dresses laughed at us. Farmers in white gowns stood bemused. Yet everyone was happy and accommodating. Fields of sorghum surrounded us, shimmering with gold. How many foreigners do you think have ever had the privilege of seeing this part of Sudan? Nate asked, as we stopped to drink water in the sweltering heat. It can't be many, I said. Around us, the golden fields stretched in unbroken waves underneath a flawless blue sky. It was beautiful in its purity, but also from the effort that it had taken for us to get there. We knew that this moment was the only time in our lives that we would stand in that exact place. No matter what else happens on this trip, this is enough, said Nate. I hope so, I said. Finally, we made it through the last gravel track and arrived at the border with Ethiopia. The women wore tight t-shirts. There was beer, loud music, prostitutes, and noise everywhere. The Muslim world was over. Welcome back to Christianity.